Today we have a very exciting guest. We have the new Blancpain 50 Fathoms Titanium, and there's been a couple of changes that are pretty cool. Welcome back to Time on the Wrist at Chisholm Hunter. My name is Harrison, as always, and today we have the Blancpain 50 Fathoms Titanium version. There's a couple of cool features about the Blancpain that I want to talk about. So let's go over all the specs, everything you need to know, but before we do that, it's absolutely roasting in here. It's summer in Glasgow, I'm gonna have to take this off. The first feature that you need to know about this watch is the case diameter. Now the case diameter for this model comes in at 43 millimeters. Personally speaking, that is slightly too big for my wrists. I tap out at 42 millimeters. My Omega Seamaster that I have at home is 42 millimeters, and it is on the cusp of being too big. I would probably start at about 38, 39 mil, and then I would work my way up to about 42. That's because I have 6.5 inch wrists. So just beware that this is a bigger watch. Moving quickly onto the thickness of this model, and we're getting out the old trusty digital calipers for this one. It comes in, according to our digital calipers, at 13.2 millimeters, maybe just under 13.2 millimeters. Now, this is an interesting one. That is quite thick, but then remember, it is a fully automatic, hand-finished movement. Movements from Blancpain are absolutely beautiful, I have to say this. So that might give it a little bit of thickness. Also remember that this is water resistant to 300 meters, which will also give it a bit of added thickness. Diving watches do tend to be that little bit thicker, and it's not too thick. I think it sits quite nicely. Both the case and the bracelet of this model are made from grade 23 titanium. Now, grade 23 titanium is rarely used in the watch industry, and it's rarely used because it's extremely difficult to work with. It's one of the more harder materials to work with, and it gives it a really dark, stealthy appearance. And when paired with that anthracite grey dial, it works wonderfully in unison, I have to say that. And also when you pick this watch up, the weight, it's just weird. It feels so light. You know that you're picking up a quality product, but because it's titanium, it feels so light to me. It would take some getting used to. With that said, let's get this on the scales for you guys so that you can see exactly how much it weighs. And then what we'll do after that is get my Hamilton on the scales just to compare. This comes in at 134 grams. And that's with the full bracelet, no links taken out. So it is quite light for a diving watch. Now, what we'll do is we'll put the Hamilton khaki field on and see how much that weighs, because I know a lot of these watches that are coming through at the moment are new, and I know that you might not have held them and felt them. So I think it's good to give you just a slight comparison. Now, the Hamilton khaki field is fully mechanical and comes on the NATO strap, and it comes in at 61 grams, maybe just under, maybe touching 60 grams. So there's your comparison. This is heavy, but I think most of the weight comes from the movement because the bracelet and the case are light as a feather. Taking a deeper dive into the case and the bracelet. The case and the bracelet are quite angular, they're quite modern, and when you compare this to the previous versions of the Blancpain, it does look more modern, I would say. Less vintage, it looks more current. And I like that. I think that a lot of brands are feeding into that 70s Genta inspired kind of design, and they've gone for that angular approach, which I really like. The crown on the right hand side of this model is quite short and quite stubby, but quite big and very easy to turn. It's very functional, and actually for the size of this watch, I think they've nailed the crown. It's not too big, not too small, and it's still really functional. Remember that this is a diving watch, and Blancpain actually created the first diving watches ever in the world. So I like that bit of history, and I like that little sprinkle. Before we move on to that bracelet and before we get onto that clasp, let's cover something very important. Chisholm Hunter are actually authorized retailers for Blancpain watches, so if you want to shop any in the Blancpain range, make sure you click the link below. The bracelet on this model is still quite thick. It doesn't taper as much as other bracelets that I've seen, and I suppose this kind of fits in with the big, bulky, diving nature of this watch. I actually don't mind it, I quite like it. Actually, I'd go as far to say is that I prefer this to my Omega Seamaster's bracelet at home. I just think it feels that little bit nicer, and I think the dark, stealthy approach really works. Then you get to the back of this watch, you can see the engraving of the Blancpain logo and the Blancpain full logo in that butterfly clasp, or on that butterfly clasp. There we go, just there. And People underestimate how hard that is to do, especially when working with a material like titanium. To engrave your logo is really difficult, so it just shows the lengths that Blancpain go to get the finished article. The bezel on this model is an interesting one. It comes in anthracite grey. It has a dot of lume at the top, making it fully functional diver. It has silver kind of numerals that kind of blend in to the bezel, but are still quite readable. I would have said that maybe in white it would have been more readable, but I don't think it takes away from the aesthetic. It's all quite muted, it's all quite dark, and I quite like that. I would say that the bezel is a little bit thinner than my Amiga Seamaster sitting at home, and it's interesting. They've made the bezel thinner, and they've made the face bigger. It gives it more dial real estate, but they haven't necessarily made the numerals and the markers bigger. They've kept them the same as maybe the previous versions. I just think they should have maybe made the markers bigger if they were minimizing that bezel, and it would have been a little bit clearer to read. I'm not saying it's not clear to read, I just think it would have been maybe clearer. Moving into that beautiful dial, and I say beautiful dial because the texture of this dial is beautiful. The dial on this watch has a handcrafted vertical satin finish, and that makes it almost look extremely matte, and I want to repeat that again. It's handcrafted. And a lot of Blancpain's components are handcrafted. That's why they demand such a price point. But they can demand that price point because they're beautiful watches with stunning movements. And I do have to say that I'm a huge fan of Blancpain. I love that anthracite dial, but what I love more than the anthracite dial is that splash of red on the second hand. I think that plays wonderfully with that dial. Then you have superluminova in the hands and the indices, and a very classic, clean looking dial. But there's something that I'm not as sure about. The dates window on this model isn't at the 3 o'clock mark, it's not at the 6 o'clock mark. It doesn't have a magnification window, which I'm super excited about because I'm not as keen on magnification windows. But it is at the 4:30 mark. Now, although this is quirky, and this is actually quite cool in a lot of ways, I do quite like 6 o'clock date windows, and especially when they have a blank bit of space at the 6 o'clock mark. When it comes to chronographs, I can understand that they have those 3 subdials and they kind of need to put the date window at the 4:30 mark. But I would have just quite liked to see this at the 6 o'clock mark. And I think if they have more iterations of the Blancpain 50 Fathoms, that'd be a cool feature. But then that's watchmaking. You're gonna like some things, not like others, and then new variations come out and you do like them, and yeah, you guys get it. As you can see, the lume shines extremely bright, and this has literally been under the flashlight for like 10 seconds, not even 10 seconds. It is one of the brightest lumes I've seen so far, and that is not me joking. I think IWC competes, but this is just in front of them. The glass on this watch sports sapphire crystal glass, and on the back, on the reverse of this watch, you can see the beautiful movement through the Expedition case back. But before we go on to the movement, it's time for the tradition around here at Chisholm Hunter, which is of course the wrist check. What's on your wrist today? Let me know in the comments. I am currently rocking the Hamilton Khaki Field Mechanical. It's a beautiful watch for a pretty incredible price. The movement in this model is the caliber 1315, a totally in-house movement by Blancpain. It comes in at 5.65 millimeters in thickness. Its diameter comes in at 30.60 millimeters. It has a power reserve of a whopping 120 hours and has 35 joules. It has 227 components, is fully automatic, and is pretty damn beautiful. Never mind the 22-carat rotor in the back. There is no doubt in my mind that this movement is an absolute gorgeous handcrafted powerhouse, and this is where Blancpain's history really shines through. They are the longest watch brand ever, not in continuous production, but alive, ever. Blancpain are the eldest, which is insane, and this is where you can see their expertise really shining through. Not to mention that 35 joules is a huge amount of joules for a movement, and this gives the movement more longevity. Basically what happens in a movement that doesn't have as many joules is more steel or more metal touches metal, and over time, through wear and tear, if it's not oiled, they can kind of rust and rub against each other, causing more wear and tear. Whereas when there's joules, it's kind of joules and oil sloshing around instead of the metal touching the metal, giving it lower longevity. So by a general rule of thumb, the more joules something has, sometimes the better. This watch by all means is a dark horse. And I mean that genuinely. When you actually have it on the wrist, it doesn't wear quite as big as you would think. And that's partly because of its darkened exterior. It's partly because of how light it is, and it's partly because of that anthracite dial. I think this is actually a lot more suitable to smaller wrists than people may think. Although it's slightly too big for me, it might not be slightly too big for you. I'd advise to come try it on because it is a beautiful watch with amazing materials used. I'm a huge fan of Blancpain, and I always will be. Well done. If you want to join the Chisholm Hunter watch community, then make sure you hit this subscribe button right here or follow our Instagram page at Chisholm Hunter Watches. We will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and comment below if you think I look tanned, by the way. I just got back from Indonesia, and 3 weeks I was there, still look like Casper the Ghost.